If your inheritance carried more debt than silver, would you fight for it or sell your soul to the highest bidder? The courthouse bell had just finished striking 9 when Sarah Whitmore stepped down from the morning stage into Silverbrook's thin October air. Her leather satchel, worn smooth from 2 years of traveling between mining camps, pressed against her ribs as the altitude caught her breath. The compass in her coat pocket, her father's last gift, seemed to pull heavier here. 8,000 feet above the eastern plains she'd called home. Sarah Whitmore? The stage driver consulted his manifest. That'll be $4 fare from Denver. She counted the coins into his weathered palm, watching her traveling funds shrink to $23 and change. The driver tossed her carpet bag to the platform boards with a thud that echoed off the false fronts lining Main Street. Next eastbound's Thursday morning. If you're not staying long. Sarah adjusted her grip on the satchel. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay the deed that had brought her to this high-country town, a piece of paper that made her the rightful owner of 40 acres and a played-out silver claim. Her uncle's final act before the consumption took him. The assay office drew her first, its painted sign creaking on iron chains. A knot of men clustered around posted notices tacked to the door frame, their voices carrying across the morning stillness. Mine safety inspectors coming through next week, one said, tobacco juice darkening the dust at his boots. Every outfit gets a look-see. About time. That cave-in at the Lucky Strike could have been worse. Sarah approached the group, her boot heels announcing her presence on the wooden sidewalk. The men's conversation died like a snuffed candle. Morning, gentlemen. She nodded toward the notices. Might I read the postings? The men shifted, making room but not meeting her eyes. One notice announced the safety inspection. Another offered reward money for information about claim jumping. A third, printed on cream-colored stock, made her stomach tighten. Legal notice. The estate of Cornelius Whitmore, deceased, disputed. All parties claiming interest must present documentation to Silverbrook District Court by the 30th of October, 1887. Judge Milliken proceeding. 3 days. Sarah's fingers found the compass again, its brass case warm against her palm. You'd be the niece, then. The voice belonged to a lean man in a cattleman's hat. His weathered face, neutral but watchful. Tom Brennan. I run cattle on the range south of town. Sarah Whitmore. She offered her hand, noting how his calloused palm engulfed her gloved fingers. I've come to settle my uncle's affairs. Might be more complicated than you reckon. Brennan's grey eyes held hers steady. Cornelius. He had his difficulties toward the end. Debts, disputes. A woman emerged from the mercantile across the street, her silk dress a splash of blue against the weathered storefronts. She paused, taking in Sarah's travel-dusty appearance, then crossed to the other side of Main Street with deliberate care. That'd be Mrs. Caldwell, Brennan said quietly. Banker's wife. Cornelius owed her husband considerable money. Sarah felt the weight of watching eyes from shop windows and doorways. The compass needle in her pocket seemed to quiver against her thumb. I see. The courthouse bell chimed the quarter hour, its bronze voice echoing off the surrounding peaks. Sarah counted the strokes automatically, a habit learned in childhood when time mattered less than it did now, when 3 days felt like a lifetime or a heartbeat, depending on which way the legal wind might blow. Mr. Brennan, she said. Decision crystallizing like frost on glass. Might you direct me to my uncle's property? I'd like to see what I've inherited before I decide how to proceed. Brennan touched the brim of his hat. I'll do better than that, Miss Whitmore. I'll ride out with you. If you've a mind for company, the trail can be tricky for those who don't know the country. As they walked toward the livery stable, Sarah noticed a man working fence line at the town's edge, his movements efficient and sure. Each twist of his wire pliers caught the morning sun, sending brief signals across the valley like a heliograph operator's code. The livery owner, a barrel-chested man named Murphy, eyed Sarah's riding skirt with skepticism. Got a nice side saddle mare, he offered. Gentle as a lamb. $2 for the day. I prefer to ride astride if you have a suitable mount. Sarah's voice carried the authority she'd learned managing her father's accounts back in Kansas. Something with mountain experience. Murphy's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline, but he led them to a sturdy bay gelding. Buck here knows every trail in 3 counties. $3, and you bring him back sound. As Sarah settled into the unfamiliar weight of the western saddle, the compass in her pocket pressed against her hip, a reminder that true direction sometimes required finding your own way, regardless of what others expected. The sun had climbed another hand's width above the eastern peaks when they rode out of Silverbrook, heading west toward the mining claims that dotted the mountainside like scattered hope made manifest in timber and stone. The trail to Cornelius Whitmore's claim wound through stands of aspen and pine, their October gold and green, creating a tapestry that might have lifted Sarah's spirits under different circumstances. Instead, she found herself cataloguing the practical details. 1,500 feet of elevation gain over 3 miles, rocky terrain that would challenge a loaded wagon, and everywhere the signs of played-out mining operations, abandoned sluice boxes, timber frameworks standing like skeletons against the mountainside. Your uncle's claim is just ahead, Brennan said, reining his horse around a washout that spoke of spring snowmelt running wild. The charity lode, he called it. They crested a ridge, and Sarah got her first look at her inheritance. A log cabin, its chinking dark with age, squatted beside a shaft house that leaned at a weary angle. Mining equipment lay scattered in the yard, a rocker box with a cracked cradle, coils of rope that had seen better decades, and an anvil that must have weighed 200 pounds, evidence of her uncle's optimism, transported up the mountain by mule and determination. The courthouse bell's distant chime carried on the thin air 10:30, its bronze voice somehow lonelier at this altitude. Cornelius worked this ground for 8 years, Brennan said, swinging down from his saddle. Found enough color to keep hope alive, never quite enough to pay the bills. Sarah dismounted, her legs unsteady after the mountain ride. The satchel's weight reminded her of the deed inside legal proof of ownership, assuming Judge Milliken agreed with her interpretation of Colorado mining law. The cabin door stood ajar. Inside, dust motes danced in window light that revealed her uncle's final months. A table scattered with assay reports, empty whiskey bottles lined up like soldiers, and newspapers dated through August. The Rocky Mountain News headline from the 15th of August caught her eye. Silver prices continue decline, mining towns face uncertain future. He kept hoping for a strike that would change everything, Brennan said from the doorway. Last time I saw him, he was talking about bringing in hydraulic equipment. Big plans, bigger debt. Sarah opened her satchel and withdrew the deed, its legal language precise as surveyor's marks. According to this, I own 40 acres, mineral rights included. The question is whether it's worth the debts attached. She stepped to the window, looking down the valley towards Silverbrook. From here, the town looked like a child's toys scattered across the valley floor. The courthouse bell tower, a tiny spear pointing toward heaven. Miss Whitmore. Brennan's voice carried a careful note. There's something you ought to know about the land situation hereabouts. Sarah turned, still holding the deed. What kind of situation? Your uncle's 40 acres includes a water source. Willow Creek runs right through the middle of your claim. Water rights in this country are more valuable than silver, some years. Through the cabin's rear window, Sarah could see the creek in question, its surface catching sunlight like scattered coins. A small thing, perhaps 10 feet wide, but running clear and steady even in October's dry season. And, she prompted, the Caldwells, the banker, and his missus, they've been buying up land with water access, consolidating holdings. Your uncle's creek feeds the irrigation system that keeps their ranch operations going down in the valley. Sarah folded the deed carefully, her fingers tracing its edges. The compass in her pocket seemed to grow heavier, as if it could sense the weight of decision approaching. A new sound drifted up from the valley, the rhythmic ring of hammer on metal. Someone was working, despite the morning chill, their labor marking time like a human metronome. That'd be Jim Crawford, Brennan said, following her gaze. He's been extending fence line all along the valley floor. Boundary work, mostly, but he's particular about property lines. Sarah watched the distant figure for a moment, noting the steady rhythm of his work. In Kansas, her father had taught her that good fences made good neighbors, but also that some fences were built not to keep livestock in, but to keep people out. Mr. Brennan, I need to ask you something directly. She met his gray eyes. What exactly did my uncle owe, and to whom? Brennan removed his hat, running fingers through greying hair. Near as I can figure, about $1,200 to the Silverbrook Bank, plus another $300 to various merchants in town. The bank holds a lien against the property. $1,500. Sarah's heart sank as she calculated, more than her annual teacher's salary back in Kansas, more than the deed was likely worth in current market conditions. The hammer sounds from the valley continued, steady as clockwork. Sarah found their rhythm oddly comforting evidence that someone, at least, was building something instead of watching it crumble. "There's more," Brennan said quietly. "The Caldwells made your uncle an offer last month. They wanted to buy the claim for $2,000, enough to clear his debts with money left over. He refused. He did. Said the water rights alone were worth twice that, and he wasn't about to let them corner the market on creek access." Brennan's voice carried grudging admiration. "Stubborn as a mule, your uncle. Some folks called it principle. Others called it foolishness." Sarah walked to the cabin's front window, looking down at Silverbrook spread across the valley floor. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys, each one representing lives and livelihoods that depended on the town's continued existence. If the mining economy collapsed entirely, what happened to the merchants, the livery operators, the women who took in laundry? The compass in her pocket pressed against her hip bone, its brass case warming to her body heat. Her father had carried it through 3 years of Union Army service, trusting its needle to point toward home when everything else pointed toward uncertainty. "I need to think," she said finally. "And I need to understand exactly what my legal position is before I make any decisions." The distant courthouse bell chimed 11 o'clock, its bronze voice a reminder that time moved forward regardless of human hesitation. Sarah counted the strokes automatically, a habit that had become as natural as breathing. 3 more days until Judge Milliken's deadline. 3 days to decide whether to fight for an inheritance that might be worth less than its accompanying debt, or to walk away from the last connection to family she had left. The hammering from the valley continued, steady and purposeful. Sarah found herself wondering what kind of fence Jim Crawford was building and whether it was designed to keep something in or keep something out. Sarah stood at the edge of Willow Creek, her boots sinking slightly into the marshy ground where mountain water met meadow grass. The stream ran clear and cold, chattering over rounded stones that had tumbled down from the high country for countless seasons. She had sent Brennan back to town with a message for Judge Milliken. She would present her case in court as scheduled, but first she needed to understand exactly what she was fighting for. The compass lay open in her palm, its brass case catching the noon Sunday. Due south. The needle pointed steadily toward Silverbrook, due north toward the high peaks where snow already dusted the summits in October white. East and west, the needle wavered slightly in the mountain air, as if uncertain which direction offered the truest path. A footstep behind her made her turn. A man approached from the direction of town, his gait steady despite the uneven ground. He carried a fence post driver and wore the kind of practical clothes that spoke of outdoor work: canvas pants, leather boots that had seen plenty of weather, a wool shirt with sleeves rolled up despite the mountain chill. "Miss Whitmore?" His voice carried easily across the meadow. "I'm Jim Crawford. Tom Brennan mentioned you'd come up to see the property." Sarah closed the compass and slipped it into her pocket. "Mr. Crawford, I heard your hammer from the cabin, industrious work for such a cool morning." Crawford planted the post driver in the soft ground and rested both hands on its handle. He was younger than Brennan, perhaps 35, with the kind of weathered face that came from years of working under an open sky. His eyes, she noticed, were the color of creek, water, gray-green and direct. "Property lines don't respect the weather," he said with a slight smile. "Your uncle asked me to survey the boundary between his claim and the valley grazing land. I've been working my way up from the main road, setting markers as I go. And what have you found?" Crawford gestured toward the creek, then swept his arm to encompass the surrounding meadow. "Your 40 acres includes not just the water source, but the best natural hay ground in this part of the valley. Come spring, this meadow could feed a considerable herd through the summer months." Sarah studied the landscape with new eyes. What had looked like empty wilderness now revealed its potential. Natural irrigation, fertile soil, and grass that grew thick despite the altitude. Cornelius knew what he had, Crawford continued. That's why he wouldn't sell to the Caldwells, no matter how much debt piled up. He understood that controlling water means controlling everything downstream. The creek burbled past Sarah's feet, carrying snowmelt toward the valley where it would eventually join larger streams, then rivers, then the great waterways that flowed east toward distant oceans. She thought of her father's compass, how it had pointed him home through war and uncertainty. Mr. Crawford, may I ask you something directly? I'm listening. Why would a fence builder take interest in mining claims and water rights? Crawford's smile widened, transforming his weathered features. Because I'm not just a fence builder, Miss Whitmore. I'm a rancher who's been working other men's land for 15 years, saving every dollar I could toward buying my own spread. Your uncle's creek feeds the best grazing land in 3 counties. The courthouse bell's bronze voice drifted up from the valley, marking the noon hour with 12 measured strokes. Sarah found herself counting automatically, a habit that connected her to time's forward movement, even in moments that felt suspended outside ordinary life. You're interested in purchasing the claim, she said. It wasn't a question. I am, but not the way the Caldwells are. Crawford pulled the post driver from the soft earth and hefted it across his shoulder. They want to buy your water rights to control them. I want to buy your land to use it. What's the difference? The difference is what happens to Silverbrook if one family controls every creek between here and the county line. Crawford's voice carried conviction that reminded Sarah of her father's discussions of democratic principle during those long Kansas evenings. Towns need competition to stay honest. Monopolies serve only the monopolists. Sarah walked a few steps along the creek bank, watching how the water carved its path between stones and around fallen logs. Nature's course, following the line of least resistance while still maintaining forward motion. What kind of offer are you prepared to make? $2,500. Cash money, available when you're ready to sign papers. The number hung in the mountain air between them, enough to clear her uncle's debts with $1,000 remaining more money than Sarah had ever held at one time, enough to buy her independence in a dozen different ways. That's generous, she said carefully. It's fair. I've saved for this opportunity for 15 years. I know what the land is worth, and I know what it could become with proper stewardship. Sarah opened the compass again, watching its needle swing toward true north. The high peaks rose like cathedral spires, their snow-covered summits gleaming in the thin air. Somewhere up there, her uncle had spent 8 years searching for silver that would make him rich enough to thumb his nose at debt and social pressure. He had died poor in terms of cash money, but rich in the conviction that some things, water, land, principle, shouldn't be sold to the highest bidder without considering the consequences. Mr. Crawford, I need to ask you to be patient with me. I have a court appearance in 3 days, and I need to understand all my options before I make any commitments. Crawford nodded, shifting the post driver to his other shoulder. I understand, but Miss Whitmore, I should mention, the Caldwells have been buying up every available water source in the valley. If they acquire your creek, they'll control irrigation for every farm and ranch between here and the Colorado River junction. That's a powerful position. And a dangerous one? For everyone else, yes. The compass needle steadied, pointing toward the peaks where her uncle had spent his final years chasing silver dreams. Sarah closed the case and looked directly at Crawford, noting how his gray-green eyes held hers without wavering. 3 days, she said. After I present my case to Judge Milliken, I'll give you my answer. Crawford touched the brim of his hat. Fair enough. I'll be working fence line down in the valley if you need to find me. The sound of the post driver carries pretty well in this country. As he walked back toward town, Sarah remained beside the creek, listening to its constant murmur. The water spoke of permanence and change, both the same stream that had run here for centuries, but never the same water twice. The compass in her pocket seemed to pulse with warmth, as if her father's spirit approved of careful deliberation over hasty decision. Some choices, she realized, were about more than money. Some choices were about what kind of person you became in the making of them. The Silver Bell Saloon buzzed with conversation as Sarah pushed through the batwing doors at 2 o'clock, her riding boots announcing her presence on the plank floor. The barkeep, a portly man with rolled shirt sleeves, looked up from polishing glasses with surprise that quickly shifted to caution. Afternoon, miss. he said formally. Ladies' parlor is upstairs, if you're looking for Mrs. Henderson about sewing work. Actually, I'm looking for information. Sarah approached the bar, noting how conversations at nearby tables grew quieter. I'm Sarah Whitmore, Cornelius Whitmore's niece. I understand my uncle spent considerable time here toward the end. The barkeep set down his glass with deliberate care. Cornelius was a regular, that's true. Paid his tab in silver dust most months. Though toward the end, he shrugged eloquently. Toward the end, he paid in promises, a voice said from the corner table. A grizzled man in miner's clothes raised his whiskey glass in mock salute. Promises and talk about hydraulic equipment that was going to make us all rich. Sarah turned toward the voice, her satchel containing the deed pressed against her side. You worked with my uncle? Worked for him, more like. Last 6 months, anyway. Pete Kowalski's my name. Your uncle hired me to help with the heavy lifting when his lungs got too bad for real work. The courthouse bell's bronze voice drifted through the saloon's open windows, marking 2:15 with measured strokes. Sarah counted automatically, aware that each chime brought Judge Milliken's deadline closer. What kind of heavy lifting? She asked. Kowalski gestured for her to join him at his corner table, away from the bar's listening ears. Digging, mostly. Your uncle was convinced there was a main vein running deeper than he'd gone, kept talking about bringing in water pressure to blast through the hard rock. Sarah sat carefully, aware of curious glances from other patrons. Did he find anything? Not silver. But he found something. Kowalski lowered his voice. 3 weeks before he died, we hit an underground spring. Sweet water, flowing steady, even in August heat. Your uncle. He got excited about that water, like it was a gold strike. The compass in Sarah's pocket seemed to grow warm against her leg. Underground water feeding Willow Creek, making it reliable even in drought years. No wonder the Caldwells wanted the property so desperately. Did he tell anyone else about this discovery? Just me and Jim Crawford. Your uncle asked Jim to help him figure out water rights law whether underground springs counted the same as surface streams for legal purposes. The saloon's batwing doors swung open, admitting a well-dressed man in a city suit. Banker Caldwell, Sarah realized, recognizing him from his wife's pointed avoidance that morning. He surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on Sarah's table before he approached the bar. Afternoon, Henderson, Caldwell said to the barkeep. I trust you've prepared the documents we discuss. The barkeep reached under the bar and produced a folded paper. Right here, Mr. Caldwell. Sworn statement regarding Cornelius Whitmore's debts to this establishment. Sarah's stomach tightened. Legal documents appearing in saloons meant someone was building a case for court. Caldwell pocketed the paper and turned towards Sarah's table. Miss Whitmore, isn't it? I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Marcus Caldwell, president of Silverbrook Bank. Mr. Caldwell. Sarah rose from her chair, extending her hand with practiced courtesy. I understand you knew my uncle. Indeed. Cornelius was a valued customer for many years, though recent circumstances became complicated. Caldwell's handshake was firm but brief. I wonder if we might speak privately. I have a proposition that could benefit us both. Kowalski cleared his throat meaningfully. Miss Whitmore, I'll be working at the charity load tomorrow morning if you want to see that spring I mentioned. Bring a lantern. Sarah nodded to the miner, then followed Caldwell to a table near the saloon's front windows. Outside, she could see Jim Crawford working his way up Main Street, setting fence posts with methodical precision. Each strike of his post driver rang across the valley like a blacksmith's hammer marking time. Miss Whitmore, Caldwell began, his voice taking on the tone of a man accustomed to closing deals. I'll speak plainly. Your uncle's estate carries significant debt, $1,500 to my bank alone, plus various merchant accounts around town. The mining claim, while sentiment makes it valuable to you, has little practical worth in current silver markets. Sarah kept her expression neutral. I'm listening. However, my wife and I are prepared to make a generous offer for the property. $3,000, cash, available for transfer tomorrow morning. More than enough to clear all debts with a substantial sum remaining for your personal use. $3,000. $500 more than Crawford's offer and available immediately. Sarah felt the compass's weight in her pocket. its steady presence a reminder of her father's counsel. When someone makes an offer too good to refuse, figure out what they're not telling you. That's very generous, Mr. Caldwell. May I ask what you intend to do with a played-out mining claim? Consolidation, my dear. The future of this valley lies in large-scale ranching operations, not individual prospectors scratching at played-out veins. Water access will become increasingly important as we develop the region. Through the window, Sarah watched Crawford measure the distance between fence posts with a surveyor's chain. His movements were careful, precise, the habits of a man who understood that good work required attention to detail. I assume you've researched the property thoroughly, she said. Caldwell's smile carried the confidence of a man holding winning cards. Of course. We're aware of the creek, naturally. Excellent for irrigation purposes. He didn't mention the underground spring. Either he didn't know about it, or he was being deliberately deceptive. Sarah filed the information away for future consideration. Mr. Caldwell, I appreciate your offer, but I have a court appearance scheduled for Monday. I'd prefer to resolve the legal questions about my inheritance before making any commitments. Caldwell's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Miss Whitmore, I should mention that my bank holds senior liens against your uncle's property. If those debts aren't satisfied promptly, we'll be forced to initiate foreclosure proceedings. Such actions can be expensive for all parties involved. The threat was politely delivered but unmistakable. Sarah felt her temper flare, then controlled it with an effort her father would have recognized. I understand your position, Mr. Caldwell. I trust you understand mine. I need to examine all options before making such an important decision. The courthouse bell chimed 2:30, its bronze voice carrying across the valley like a distant warning. Sarah counted the strokes, aware that time was indeed moving forward, carrying her toward Monday's confrontation with Judge Milliken. Caldwell rose from his chair, adjusting his city suit jacket. Of course. But Miss Whitmore, I should warn you that property values in mining country can be volatile. An offer available today might not be available tomorrow. After he left, Sarah remained at the window table, watching Jim Crawford's steady progress up Main Street. His post driver rang against iron with metronomic regularity, each strike measuring time like a mechanical clock. She found the sound oddly comforting evidence that someone, at least, was building something permanent in a world where mining booms collapsed and bank threats loomed like mountain storms. The compass in her pocket pressed against her leg, warm and reassuring. Her father had trusted its needle to point toward home through 3 years of war. Now Sarah needed to trust her own instincts to point toward whatever direction might lead to justice, not just survival. Pete Kowalski approached her table, his empty whiskey glass in hand. Miss Whitmore, if I might offer some advice. I'm listening. Your uncle, he might have been stubborn, and he might have died poor, but he died honest. Can't say the same for everyone in this valley. Kowalski glanced toward the batwing doors where Caldwell had exited. Sometimes the highest bidder ain't the best buyer. As Sarah walked back toward her hotel, Crawford's post driver continued its steady rhythm, marking time and territory with equal precision. The sound followed her down Main Street, like a promise that some things, at least, were built to last. Judge Milliken's courtroom filled with the subdued murmur of Monday morning business as Sarah took her seat at the petitioner's table. The courthouse bell had just finished striking 9, its bronze voice echoing off the high ceiling where October sunlight streamed through tall windows. Sarah counted the chimes automatically, aware that the next hour would determine whether she would leave Silverbrook as a property owner or as just another eastbound passenger on Thursday's stage. Her leather satchel sat on the table before her, containing the deed that represented her uncle's legacy and her own uncertain future. The brass compass in her pocket pressed warm against her leg, a talisman of steadiness in a room where legal winds might blow from any direction. All rise, called the bailiff, a grey-haired man whose voice carried the authority of long practice. The Honourable Judge Thomas Milliken presiding. Judge Milliken emerged from his chambers, black robes billowing as he took the bench. He was younger than Sarah had expected, perhaps 50, with the kind of sharp eyes that suggested he'd seen his share of mining disputes and frontier justice. Be seated, Milliken said, arranging papers on his desk. We're here to consider the matter of the Cornelius Whitmore estate, specifically the ownership and encumbrances of mining claim designated as the charity lode. Miss Sarah Whitmore, you appear as petitioner? Sarah rose from her chair. Yes, Your Honor, I am Cornelius Whitmore's niece and heir, holding deed to the property in question. And Mr. Marcus Caldwell, you appear for Silverbrook Bank? Caldwell rose from the opposite table, his city suit pressed and formal. Yes, Your Honor. The bank holds senior liens against the property, totaling $1,500 plus accrued interest. Sarah noticed Jim Crawford slip quietly into the courtroom's back row, his fence-building clothes cleaned for the occasion. Tom Brennan sat nearby, hat in hand, his cattleman's face attentive. Even Pete Kowalski had cleaned up for the proceedings, his miner's beard trimmed and his shirt pressed. Miss Whitmore, Judge Milliken said, please present your claim. Sarah approached the bench, her boot heels echoing in the courtroom's formal quiet. Your Honor, I hold legal deed to the Charity Lode mining claim, inherited from my uncle upon his death. The property includes 40 acres with mineral rights and water access. She placed the deed on the judge's desk, its legal language precise as surveyor's marks. I understand the property carries debt, but I maintain that ownership remains valid regardless of encumbrances. Judge Milliken examined the document carefully, his eyes moving across the legal language with practiced efficiency. The deed appears properly executed and recorded. Mr. Caldwell, what is the nature of your challenge? Caldwell rose with the confidence of a man accustomed to winning legal battles. Your Honor, while we don't dispute Miss Whitmore's inheritance rights, we maintain that senior liens against the property supersede those rights. The deceased owed $1,500 to our bank, plus an additional $300 to various merchants represented by our legal counsel. $1,800 total, Judge Milliken said. Miss Whitmore, do you contest the debt? No, Your Honor. I accept that my uncle owed money. However, I maintain that debt doesn't invalidate ownership. It simply creates obligation. And how do you propose to satisfy this obligation? Sarah felt the weight of watching eyes from the courtroom gallery. Crawford's steady gaze, Brennan's supportive nod, even Kowalski's encouraging smile. Her father's compass seemed to pulse in her pocket, its brass case warming to her body heat. Your Honor, I have reason to believe the property is worth considerably more than the attached debt. I request time to arrange financing for debt satisfaction. Caldwell stood immediately. Objection, Your Honor. The defendant has had ample opportunity to resolve this matter. Silverbrook Bank made a generous offer of $3,000 for the property, more than enough to satisfy all debts with money remaining. This offer was declined. Miss Whitmore? Judge Milliken's voice carried a note of inquiry. Your Honor, I declined that offer because I believe the property's true value exceeds the amount offered. I have reason to believe there are water rights involved that haven't been properly assessed. The courtroom stirred with interest. Water rights in high country mining disputes often proved more valuable than mineral rights, especially in drought years. What evidence do you offer regarding these water rights? Judge Milliken asked. Sarah looked toward the back of the courtroom where Pete Kowalski sat with his hat in his hands. The miner nodded almost imperceptibly. Your Honor, I call Pete Kowalski as witness. Kowalski rose from his seat and walked to the witness chair with the careful dignity of a working man in a formal setting. The bailiff administered the oath, and Kowalski placed his calloused hand on the courthouse Bible. Mr. Kowalski, Sarah said, you worked with my uncle during his final months? Yes, miss. Hired me for heavy work when his lungs got too bad for digging. During this work, did you make any discoveries regarding water sources on the property? Caldwell rose quickly. Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay. Mr. Kowalski, Judge Milliken said, please confine your testimony to direct observation. Yes, sir. Kowalski straightened in the witness chair. 3 weeks before Cornelius died, we was digging in the back of the main shaft, trying to follow a quartz vein. We hit an underground spring sweet water, flowing steady. More water than I'd seen in any mine shaft in 20 years of digging. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Milliken rapped his gavel for order. Mr. Kowalski, in your professional opinion, was this a significant water source? Yes, sir. Significant enough that it feeds Willow Creek year-round, keeps the water flowing even in August heat. Sarah felt the tide of legal fortune shifting in her favor. Your Honor, I submit that this underground spring constitutes a major water right that substantially increases the property's value beyond the attached debts. Judge Milliken leaned back in his chair, considering the testimony. The courthouse clock's pendulum marked seconds with brass precision, each tick echoing in the formal quiet. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge said, "did your bank's assessment of the property include evaluation of water rights?" Caldwell's confidence wavered almost imperceptibly. "Your Honor, we assessed surface water access, as noted in the original deed. We were not aware of subsurface water sources." "I see." Judge Milliken turned toward the courtroom gallery. "Mr. Crawford, please approach the bench." Jim Crawford rose from the back row, his fence, builder's boots quiet on the courthouse floor. "Your Honor, you've been surveying property lines in this vicinity. Do you have professional opinion regarding water rights on the Whitmore claim?" Crawford glanced at Sarah, then faced the judge directly. "Your Honor, I've surveyed the entire drainage system between here and the county line. The Whitmore property controls the headwaters for the most reliable water source in 3 townships. If there's an underground spring feeding that creek, it makes the water rights worth considerably more than the attached debt." The courtroom stirred again. Sarah felt the compass in her pocket grow warm, as if her father's spirit approved of men who spoke truth regardless of personal cost. Judge Milliken rapped his gavel. "Order." He consulted his pocket watch, 10:15, the brass case catching window light. "This court recognizes that water rights assessment requires professional evaluation. Miss Whitmore, I'm prepared to grant you 30 days to arrange proper water rights survey and debt financing, provided you can demonstrate good faith effort to satisfy the obligations." "Your Honor," Caldwell interrupted, "the bank's position." "Mr. Caldwell, the bank's position is noted. However, this court will not permit foreclosure on property that may be worth substantially more than the debt involved. Justice requires proper assessment." Sarah felt her heart lift like a bird released from captivity. 30 days. Time enough to arrange financing, time enough to determine the property's true value. But Caldwell wasn't finished. "Your Honor, I must inform the court that Silverbrook Bank has received another party's offer to purchase our liens at face value, effectively assuming the debt obligation and acquiring immediate foreclosure rights." The courthouse fell silent. Sarah felt the compass in her pocket grow cold, its brass case suddenly heavy as lead. "What party?" Judge Milliken asked. "Western Land Consolidation Company, Your Honor. A Denver-based concern specializing in large-scale agricultural development." Crawford's voice cut across the courtroom from his position near the bench. "Your Honor, Western Land Consolidation is a subsidiary company. Their parent corporation is Rocky Mountain Agricultural Enterprises, owned by Marcus Caldwell's brother-in-law." The courtroom exploded in voices. Judge Milliken's gavel cracked like a gunshot against his desk. "Order, Mr. Crawford. How do you come by this information?" "I researched it, Your Honor. When someone's buying up every water source in the valley, a man tends to investigate who's really behind the purchasing." Sarah stared at Caldwell, watching his banker's composure crack like ice in spring sunlight. The compass in her pocket suddenly felt warm again, its brass case pulsing against her leg. "Mr. Caldwell," Judge Milliken's voice carried the chill of high country winter, "you failed to disclose your personal interest in these proceedings." "Your Honor, my brother-in-law's business activities are separate from—" "Are they, Mr. Caldwell?" The judge's eyes glittered dangerously. "Because it appears to this court that you've been attempting to force foreclosure on property you intended to acquire through family connections at considerably less than market value." Sarah found her voice. "Your Honor, I have another offer for the property. Mr. Crawford has offered $2,500. Cash, contingent on clear title." Crawford stepped forward. "That's correct. Your Honor, I've been saving 15 years to buy land in this valley. I'm prepared to honor that offer." Judge Milliken consulted his pocket watch again, 10:30, the brass hands marking time's forward movement with mechanical precision. "Miss Whitmore, Mr. Crawford's offer exceeds the debt obligation by $1,000. Are you prepared to accept?" Sarah felt the moment crystallize around her like frost forming on morning glass. Her uncle's 8 years of stubborn hope, her father's compass pointing toward true north, the choice between easy money and righteous principle. Your Honor, I accept Mr. Crawford's offer, contingent on proper water rights survey confirming the property's value. So ordered. Judge Milliken's gavel fell with the finality of mountain rockslide. Mr. Caldwell, your bank's liens will be satisfied through this transaction. The court further orders investigation into Western Land Consolidation's bidding practices for potential conflict of interest. As the courtroom began to empty, Sarah remained seated, her hands trembling slightly with released tension. The compass in her pocket felt warm and steady, its brass case a comforting weight against her leg. Crawford approached her table, hat in hand. Miss Whitmore, I want you to know my offer stands regardless of what the water survey shows. A deal's a deal, even if the property's worth more than you're paying. Crawford's weathered face creased in a smile. Especially then. Your uncle fought to keep that land out of the wrong hands. Seemed fitting to honor his fight. Pete Kowalski appeared at Sarah's elbow, his miner's face split by an enormous grin. Miss Sarah, your uncle would have been proud. Cornelius always said the right thing generally costs more than the wrong thing, but it sleeps better at night. Through the courthouse windows, Sarah could see Main Street stretching toward the mountains, its false fronts and weathered buildings speaking of hope and perseverance in equal measure. The sound of Crawford's post-driver rang across the valley, steady, rhythmic, purposeful. Mr. Crawford, she said, I have one condition. Name it. I want to retain 5 acres around the spring source. I'm thinking Silverbrook could use a schoolteacher, and teachers need a place to live. Crawford's smile widened. Miss Whitmore, I think your uncle's property just found the right kind of stewardship. The courthouse bell chimed 10:45, its bronze voice carrying across the high country like a promise that some things, justice, principle, the flow of clear water over mountain stones, endured longer than the schemes of men who confused ownership with dominion. Sarah closed her leather satchel, feeling the deed's weight settle into place beside her father's compass. Both pointing toward the same direction now, home, wherever that might be built by honest work and righteous choice. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of Silverbrook's new schoolhouse, watching her students practice their letters on slates that caught the February morning light. The building rose from the 5 acres she'd retained, its windows facing east toward the sunrise and west toward the peaks where her uncle had spent his final years. The brass compass sat open on her desk, its needle pointing steadily north toward mountains that wore winter snow like royal robes. She'd taken to using it in geography lessons, teaching children about true direction and magnetic variation, practical lessons for young minds growing up in country where getting lost could mean the difference between supper and sorrow. Through the schoolhouse window, she could see Jim Crawford's fence lines stretching across the valley, marking boundaries that meant something because they were built honestly and maintained fairly. His cattle grazed peacefully in meadows, irrigated by Willow Creek's steady flow, proof that good stewardship served both land and livestock. The courthouse bell chimed 9 o'clock, its bronze voice carrying news that Marcus Caldwell had relocated his banking operations to Denver after Judge Milliken's investigation revealed the full extent of his family's land consolidation scheme. The new bank president, a practical woman named Elizabeth Morrison, had proven considerably more interested in supporting local enterprise than controlling it. Miss Whitmore? Young Timothy Kowalski, Pete's nephew, raised his hand from the front row. Why does that compass always point the same direction? Sarah smiled, closing the brass case with the gentle care her father had taught her. Because some things stay constant, Timothy, even when everything else changes. The needle knows where true north lies, no matter how far we might wander from it. She slipped the compass into her pocket, feeling its familiar weight settle against her hip. Outside, the sound of Crawford's post-driver rang across the valley as he continued the work that seemed to have no end, mending fence, marking boundaries, building something meant to last. The market had indeed condemned her uncle, but a herdsman had raised his fence and rewritten the town's rules, not through force or cunning, but through the simple act of offering fair value for honest work. Clear water for growing things, and justice for those stubborn enough to demand it. If you'd like more stories like this, stay a while, I'll tell the next one tomorrow night.